Welcome to First Look, Washington Post's one-stop shop for news and analysis. I'm Jonathan Capehart, Associate Editor at The Washington Post. President Biden is still in the Middle East, landing in Saudi Arabia this afternoon, local time. But when he returns to Washington over the weekend, he'll return to a country with a 40-year high inflation rate and bad poll numbers. Here to make sense of the president's predicament is Dan Balch, chief correspondent at The Washington Post. Dan, welcome back to First Look.
Thank you, Jonathan. Nice to be back.
Okay, so we've got 10 minutes and a gajillion stories to talk about. Before we get to the inflation and the bad poll numbers, we got to talk about this story about the Secret Service and messages being deleted, and the Secret Service Inspector General being the one to send the letter to Congress saying, hey, these messages from January 5th and January 6th have been deleted.
Pretty extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, when this began to break yesterday afternoon, I was frankly, like I suspect everybody, astonished at that news. And we're digging in on it. Obviously, our team, Carol Lenig, who knows more about the Secret Service than any of us around, is all over this story. But this is a potentially huge development in what we think we may know about what was happening in that period in the role of the Secret Service. And given the testimony of Cassidy Hutchinson a few weeks ago about the Secret Service, this just adds to the questions about what's going on. So it's a big development, and I think we're all anxious to know more about it.
Right, and what also makes this also significant, and I stay with me here. I'm checking my notes. The Department of Homeland Security Inspector General is a man by the name of Joseph Kufari. I know I'm mispronouncing his name, but what makes it interesting is that he was appointed by Donald Trump and in that position. And so am I reading too much into this, that it was a Trump appointee who's ringing the alarm?
I don't know whether you're reading too much into that or not. I just think at this point there's so many more questions than answers, and I think we just have to go through the process of the investigations that are going to have to take place to reveal more about what this actually means. On the face of it, it sounds nefarious, but we can't totally jump to conclusions, and we'll just have to see as this unfolds exactly what happened.
Yeah, and I should also point out that he is the same guy who halted the investigation into the Secret Service behavior and role in Lafayette Park during the demonstrations after the murder of George Floyd. Okay, let's talk about the president's bad poll numbers. Dan, a New York Times Siena College poll showing the president's approval rating down to 33%. This is at Trump level approval rating. Is it all because of inflation?
Well, a fair amount of it is because of inflation. Some of it is because Democrats are disaffected with the president, as we know. I mean, I think that in that poll, his approval among Democrats is only about 70%, which is just a very low number given these polarized times. You would expect, under normal circumstances, that the president's approval rating among people in his own party would be closer to 90%. So part of it is that. Now we should note that the 33% is at this point a bit of an outlier. It's lower by several points than most of the polls, and certainly the poll average. I mean, he's still closer to 40 than to 35%. It's a terrible number, obviously, and it has attracted a huge amount of attention. But it is one poll, and I think we'll have to go through this. But even if even if he's kind of where the average is, he's in very low territory for an incumbent president at a time when his party's facing an election. So that's why Democrats are as nervous as they are and concerned about him.
Yeah, and that nervousness is showing itself in another poll number, and that is 64% of Democratic voters surveyed said they want someone other than Biden to be the presidential nominee in 2024. What's driving that? Is it disaffection with President Biden, or go ahead?
Well, Jonathan, I think it's a combination of things. I think certainly some of it is disaffection. We know that there's some disaffection on the left, impatience, frustration that he has not been able to deliver on some of the things that the progressive wing of the party has been pushing for. He has no margin of error in the Senate, and that's one of the reasons that some things have not been able to get done. And we've seen another monkey wrench thrown into the negotiations yesterday, with Senator Manchin saying he's not going to go for climate spending in this bill that they're trying to work out. So some of it is disaffection. Some of it, frankly, is the fact that he's 79 years old, and he would be 82 years old at the time he would be sworn in for a second term. There are a lot of people who think that's simply too old, and they would prefer someone else. But I think, again, we have to point out that was a poll just simply saying, would you like him to run again or not? It was not a poll that tested him against potential rivals.
Right. Right. That's a key point, Dan. But since you mentioned the Senate, let's talk about the Senate and Republicans. The Post reports this week that their chances of gaining control of the Senate may be hobbled by a string of questionable candidates. I'm thinking of Herschel Walker, Senator Johnson, Dr. Oz come to mind. If these were normal times, I'd say they're all toast. But these are not normal times, Dan. Do Republicans actually stand a chance of taking over the Senate, even with these questionable candidates?
Yes, they do, because we're in a situation in which it should be a pretty good Republican year, and so even with flawed candidates, a kind of a wave election can bring in bad candidates. And we've seen that in the past. We saw in 1980 a good number of Republicans elected to the Senate who, after one term, got knocked out because they proved not to be very effective senators. So you could see something like that happening. But I think one of the interesting things that we're seeing in this election cycle is that there is kind of near universal consensus that the Republicans are likely to take over the House of Representatives, but much more doubt about how the Senate will end up after we get through this election. It's possible that the Democrats will continue to be in control. It's possible that they'll have maybe a seat more than they have at this point, but it's certainly possible that they'll be in the minority. Jonathan, I want to go back to one point about that New York Times Siena poll. As bad as President Biden's approval rating is in that poll, the so-called generic ballot question, which is the question in which people are asked, if you were voting today, would you vote for the Republican or the Democrat in the House election in your district? There was only a 1-point difference in that. It was not as though the Republicans had any significant advantage in that. And one of the things we've seen lately is that generic ballot number is not robustly in favor of the Republicans. Again, it doesn't mean they're not going to be able to take over the House, because they don't need very many seats. But there seems to be a bit of a disconnect between where the president's approval rating is and how people think about their vote for the House. And I think that may reflect people's ambivalence about the Republican Party at this point. And we've talked about that many times before on this program.
Right. And that also is an excellent point. Keep an eye on the generic ballot numbers, because given all the bad news for the Biden administration and for Democrats, those generic numbers should be moving in favor of Republicans. Dan, we're running out of time, but I can't let you go without asking you about what the Washington Post has reported, and Olivia Nuzzi at New York Magazine is reporting that Donald Trump is actively looking at jumping back into running for president in 2024, but announcing this year, either before the midterms or after the midterms. What impact would a Donald Trump for president part 2 have? What impact would it have on the midterms if he announces before the midterm elections, which both are reporting is what he wants to do?
Jonathan, I think that it's something that most Republicans would like not to happen. If he's going to run for president again, I think they would prefer that he wait until next year, because it inserts him into the middle of the election year during the fall campaign, and it gives Democrats an opportunity to make the case, as they have been making it, that this is a choice between the Democratic Party of today however ambivalent people may be about that, and what the president and the Democrats keep calling the MAGA Republicans. And you would have the MAGA in chief out there signaling his intention to run for president again. It adds another element to this race. Republicans would prefer not to have this all be about Donald Trump and his election lies about 2020. They want to keep the focus on inflation, the crime rate, immigration, and President Biden. And to bring Donald Trump into the mix is something that I think they would prefer not to have happen.
Dan, as always, we get going. You and I talking, and when we run completely out of time, I have so many follow-up questions, so we're going to have to leave it there. Dan Balch, chief correspondent at the Washington Post, as always, thank you for coming to First Look. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, you too, Jonathan.
All right, we're going to keep the conversation going with our opinions roundtable in a moment. Let's go to the opinion side of the Washington Post, where we will find my colleagues, E.J. Dionne and David Von Dreely. Thank you both. Welcome back to First Look.
Great to be with you and with David.
Yeah. So,
hello, EJ.
I want to pick up the conversation that I was just having with Dan about the impact of Donald Trump on the midterms if he were to jump back into the presidential race. I mean, the Washington Post reported Thursday Trump may announce a presidential bid this fall, 2 years before the actual election. Actually, he's thinking of doing it, this fall. That's October, which is before the midterms. Who should worry more about the impact of that move on the midterms, Democrats or Republicans? David, you go first.
Wow. Probably the Republicans should worry about it more because it would definitely change the subject. And right now, I think the Republicans, as Dan just said so accurately, he's always right. The Republicans would prefer to be talking about the Biden administration, about its record, and about the bread and butter issues, the economy. EJ and I was remembering 30 years ago today, we were in New York together at Madison Square Garden as Bill Clinton was being nominated on that famous slogan, "It's the economy, stupid." And it still is, and it always is. This would change the topic certainly to Donald Trump. And Jonathan, you referred to Trump 2.0. It's actually about Trump 4 or 5.0. He's flirted with or run for president over and over again in his life. And he won one time against the worst campaign that I ever covered, very narrowly. So this is not a strong candidate, but he is somebody who, as we know, can suck up all the oxygen in the conversation. And that matters more to him than the Republican Party does.
Right. Wow, David, talk about memory lane. 30 years ago, you and EJ were covering the convention. I was
You were in grade school.
No. I was a college graduate at that point, but I was in the hall that night watching Bill Clinton accept the party nomination. EJ, we'll love your views on this. Who is impacted more by a Trump for President 2024 campaign announced before the 2022 midterm elections, Democrats or Republicans?
Well, I love this 30-year reunion we're having here. That's awesome. I think Democrats would be happy to organize Run Donald Run rallies all over America for many of the reasons David just said. In a normal midterm election at a normal time, the Republicans would be running away with this because 9% inflation, which is the last number, is very scary to a lot of people. The president's approval rating, as you talked about with Dan, is very low, whether it's as low as the New York Times measured it or just in the high 30s or low 40s. This is problematic. But the Republicans are not yet running away with the midterm elections because there's all sorts of other stuff going on. There is the Supreme Court and its ruling on abortion. There are the 1-6 hearings. And Donald Trump running into this race jumping into this race would be exactly what Democrats would want in many of those suburban districts that Joe Biden carried. And I am struck by something our colleague Perry Bacon pointed out in a recent column, which is very consistently the generic Democratic number for the House is running ahead of Biden's approval ratings by quite a bit in some polls. That shows that, yes, the numbers still favor the Republicans, but they are, as you suggested, they have real problems in taking over the Senate. And even if they did win the House, their margin could be a whole lot smaller than all the wave election speculation suggests. Trump would make it a lot easier for the Democrats.
All right, I've got to get you on one more thing on Trump, and that's this. Am I wrong to think that Donald Trump is considering running for president again and announcing it as early as this fall because he's trying to ice out Attorney General Merrick Garland from possibly indicting him? David.
Yeah, I'm sure that's one of many factors in his calculation. As I say, the one thing you can count on is that he's not doing this because he thinks it would be good for the Republican Party or that he wants to build, an institution or anything else. He's making the same calculation Donald Trump has always made every day of his life. What's in it for me? And generally, his answer is chaos is good. That as long as people are confused, as long as people aren't sure exactly what's going on, that's an advantage to him. And he's done that in business. He's done that in managing his image. And now I'm sure he's thinking in the same way about how can I change this dynamic that is not going well for me right now. And that includes Merrick Garland. That includes the investigation in Atlanta, in Fulton County. It includes still active investigations in New York. All of this is bad for him. So what can he do to shake up the picture?
EJ, you agree?
Yeah, I agree with you entirely. I think that Trump wants to announce early because he wants to be able to say, if Merrick Garland announces an indictment, this is all political. I think what this shows is how successful the 1-6 committee investigation has been, because I think Trump, watching all of this, watching the seamless presentation they have made, and boy, Kevin McCarthy's decision not to put any Republicans on that committee was one of the bigger political mistakes we've seen in a while. Trump has watched all of this and says the pressure on Merrick Garland now is much greater to indict. The evidence on behalf of an indictment is much greater. I got to shake this up, jump in there, and then if I'm indicted, I'll say it's all politics. I really do think that's a very big factor in his thinking.
All right,
I think the other factor, for what it's worth, Jonathan, is just that he's watching other candidates get early traction, and particularly Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, who's running head-to-head with Trump in some polls, and he's worried about letting people get momentum when he's not on the field.
I agree with that.
Yeah, and yep. I'm going to use, EJ, you talked about the January 6th committee, so I'm going to segue over to the January 6th committee hearing and the bombshell revelation made by the vice chair of the committee, Congresswoman Liz Cheney, Republican of Wyoming, at the very end of that hearing on, I think it was Tuesday. Listen.
After our last hearing, President Trump tried to call a witness in our investigation, a witness you have not yet seen in these hearings. That person declined to answer or respond to President Trump's call and instead alerted their lawyer to the call. Their lawyer alerted us, and this committee has supplied that information to the Department of Justice. Let me say one more time, we will take any effort to influence witness testimony very seriously.
EJ, the implications of Donald Trump calling a witness who is close to testifying before the committee.
Well, first of all, that clip you showed suggests something about the TV production quality of these hearings. I am struck that at the beginning of every hearing, Liz Cheney summarizes what they've done. It's previously on the 1-6 hearings. And then at the end, there's always some bombshell that you got to tune in next time, next week in 1-6 hearing. It's really remarkable how well they've done this, unlike so many other congressional committees. But yes, I think this is a big deal, but we need to know far more. Did Trump just call? Did he leave a message? If he left a message, what did he say in the message? Her implication is that they know more than just that he called. And there is other evidence of Trump allies calling other witnesses. The fact that Trump himself might have called someone may suggest an escalation of his worries about what is going before this committee. But before we draw big conclusions, I think we're going to have to tune in to find out exactly what they have.
Right. And David, to add on to this, and also to add to the drama, she also said that they sent the information to the Justice Department. So does that give credence to what EJ just said? And that is, they know a whole lot more than what Vice Chair Cheney teased out at the end of the last hearing on Tuesday.
I think it does. I agree with EJ. These hearings have delivered a lot more than I expected them to do. Sometimes, the saying, unanswered prayers are sometimes God's greatest gift. Unwritten columns are sometimes the best ones. And I'm thankful that I didn't write a column predicting that these hearings would be a bust. So I bet they do know more. They usually are underselling what they have and delivering bombshells. Trump, we know how he'll answer this. It was a perfect phone call. And he'll gut it out. And but for now, he is back on his heels. I agree with EJ. It suggests that he's starting to get worried that he would be making these phone calls himself. Possibly people around him are declining to make these calls on his behalf anymore, as they understand the legal jeopardy that they're putting themselves in.
EJ, the Wall Street Journal reported that the committee might consider seeking testimony from Donald Trump and Mike Pence. Realistically, what are the chances of them actually inviting the committee, inviting them, and the actuality or reality that Trump and or Pence would actually show up?
I think that it's pretty clear that the committee did not move earlier. I mean, obviously, they are the two witnesses who know the most. And I think the committee has clearly pursued a strategy of we are going to pile up facts before we go to DEFCON 3 or whatever it is by calling the two obvious witnesses. And they've done that. And it's clear that the more they have put out there, the more pressure they have put on other people to show up. Pat Cipollone, the White House counsel who showed up, it was after the Cassidy Hutchinson explosive testimony. And so I think they will call them in some way. And I think that Donald Trump will not appear under oath because he doesn't want to add perjury to the list of potential charges. I think it's a really interesting choice for Mike Pence, whether he wants to appear or not. I think he's got to realize that he has burned most of his bridges to the MAGA crowd. And he has sent all his other folks. For the moment, he's saying it's beneath the dignity of the vice president's office. I don't think that holds anymore after all the information we have.
Mm-hmm. We are running out of time, so I want to end on something hopeful. David, we've been mesmerized this week from images from the James Webb Space Telescope. You wrote this week that all the cost and effort that went into making the Webb telescope work was well worth it. And here's what you wrote. The farther we see, the humbler we become, and the fruit of humility is gratitude. In the time we have left, David, talk more about that.
Well, it's just this is an astonishing achievement. The engineering that went into delivering a complicated machine 1,000,000 miles from Earth, having it unfold itself, stretch out multi-layers of sun shield the size of a tennis court, all of this. Anybody who says America can't make things anymore needs to think and stop and think about the Webb Space Telescope. And then to see what it's doing, not after years, but after a couple of days. These are the very first pictures that this marvel has taken, and it's changing. It should be changing everything we know and think about the scale of the universe, and therefore our place in it. And what a miracle it is that we have this Earth, and it's just the right size and shape and atmosphere for us to live in and to appreciate what we're learning. I'm just blown away. And it's the best $10 billion the United States has spent in decades.
EJ,
everybody should read David's beautiful column. I'm glad it wasn't on his pile of unwritten columns. Thank you for that one, David.
Thank you.
And with that, how about we leave it there on such a hopeful, wonderful note. EJ Dionne, David Von Dreely, thank you both very much for coming back to First Look. Have a good weekend.
Thank you,
Jonathan.
Head to WashingtonPostLive.com to find more information about next week's interviews and to register. I'm Jonathan Capehart. Thank you for watching Washington Post Live's First Look.